Hello and welcome to How Would You Rate Your Pain? We will be exploring life, loss, love, and the power of resilience. I am Dr. Tiffany Bartell. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait to go on this journey with you. Hello and welcome to another episode of How Would You Rate Your Pain? I am here with my friend Angela, and I'm really excited about what she's going to share with you about her work. And also, I feel like we just have fun when we get to chat together. So really, this is just an excuse for us to have some talk time.
Well, it's a great excuse. And thank you for having me, Tiffany. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So I'd love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do for work, and all of those things.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Angela Poffenbaugh, and I currently live here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But I have another name. It's my Korean birth name, which is Kim Se-young. I was adopted from South Korea when I was 3 months old, have lived all over, so upstate New York, North Carolina, Florida, California, Wisconsin, now in Tennessee. Yeah, it's been fun. And I'm just a storyteller at heart. So I've been a news anchor for a little bit, and then I transitioned into more of the PR communication side of things, and now I'm just job hunting and figuring out that next chapter, next step. So
next adventure.
Yeah.
So when we had talked earlier, we talked about, some of your work that you've done with your documentary. And I'm just so interested. So many of our listeners may not know. So I'm a quarter Korean. Mm-hmm. My mom's half Korean. And our family came from South Korea to Hawaii. And so there's always been I think it's been over 120 years we've had family in the islands. And so, that's something that I'm always curious about, lived experiences. and then we have that connection. And our first meeting actually was at a local Korean restaurant. And so I feel like good things always happen over Korean food.
Oh, 100%. And you get so much food, and then more and more comes in, and you're like, all right, I guess I'll eat it all.
I guess I have to commit to this.
If you
no
insist.
choices.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what your documentary was about, and then what kind of stirred that interest in you to produce it.
Sure. So it's a documentary called There's No Place That's Home, and I made it in 2018. The reason being because I was in college getting a journalism degree, and one of the requirements to graduate was to do a documentary journalism class. And our professor said, find a topic that just speaks to your soul, because as anyone who has watched a documentary before knows, you got to go all in. It is deep and thorough research. So
totally immersed.
Yes, fully in. So I really thought, I've always been really passionate about international adoption, because that's a big part of who I am.
Yeah.
And I grew up with a lot of people, and it was a big part of who they were too. So I started looking into it, and I said, okay, what about international adoption can I do? And then I found a really interesting organization. The name is blanking off the top of my head, but I connected with some of the people there, and they were saying, actually, there's a really big fiasco going on in the U.S. right now, to where there are international adoptees whose parents may have died, or they may have grown up in abusive homes and ran away, things of that nature, and they were never legally made U.S. citizens. And they don't have their birth certificates because either it got lost, could have been a house fire, again, could have been an abusive family. But these kids who were now adults were in a very tough situation, to where maybe they were adopted from Korea and don't know how the heck to speak Korean. Or they went back to their families, and the families just couldn't find the birth certificates or the legal documentation. And on top of that, I'm sure, as you know, there was a really long waiting period for people trying to become U.S. citizens because of all the paperwork and the processing and everything.
Right.
And I think at the time when I made the documentary, there was one adoptee. She had been waiting for 3 to 4 years.
Wow. And there's so much that you can't do without your papers.
Exactly. So it was
especially
a lot
if you're like an adult.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a lot of people that were, quite honestly, really scared. They were in hiding, and it was to the point where someone would knock on their door and they would think it was ICE. Like, they were really, really on edge for very good reason. And there were people who would try to get jobs. They couldn't really do that. People who were also still just grieving emotionally the fact that they didn't grow up in a whole family,
Yeah.
that something had happened, and also they were adopted, and that adds an extra layer of complexity on top of it too. So
Yeah, it puts holes in your story if you don't know what happened before, and then maybe you don't have everything kind of cohesive where you're at. So what year did you make this documentary?
It was 2018, so it was my senior year.
So this is something that was huge, and not even, this is 2025. And we have a lot of conversations about this happening now, but this is something that's been happening, a long time for this people group.
Yeah, and to give your listeners some context, the reasoning behind it is because during the Clinton era, there was officially a law passed that said, hey, when international children are officially adopted, they automatically become U.S. citizens.
Oh.
But it didn't apply to any kids born before a certain year. And that part of the message was not communicated very clearly.
Wow.
So a lot of parents saw this law go into effect under the Clinton administration, and they said, oh, fantastic. Great. Yeah, we're good to go.
Yeah.
And then, again, things escalated, and either family members passed away, abusive homes, any kind of situation. And then these kids go, holy cow, it didn't apply to me. What do I do? And it was a weird
decade later. Yeah.
Right. And it was a weird, like, almost government hold to where the government also said, apply for citizenship. I don't know. Like, where are your papers? And these kids say, I have no idea. And I can't speak Korean. I don't know how to hunt down a Korean birth certificate in the record books because I don't even know who my birth parents were. So
wow.
Really interesting stuff. Really interesting.
Well, and I don't know that much about international adoption, but I do know that, like, was it in the 80s and maybe 90s too, there just was like a flood of international adoption, especially it seemed like Asian international adoptions.
Yeah. A lot of it came after the Korean Olympics, right? So it was essentially almost like Oprah, like, you get a baby, everyone gets a baby. But that was when Korean adoptions really ramped up because the legalities to get a baby were so easy. It was really easy to pass that test, and it wasn't really a lengthy process.
Okay.
And South Korea was doing that for a little bit. Then they essentially got caught, and people said, hey, these kids are going to maybe bad families again, or families that really can't provide for a kid at this time in their lives. So that's when later on Korea almost sealed up their restrictions and made them a lot more intense.
Okay.
So now in today's day and age, there's a lot of people that want to adopt from Korea, and it takes years to get that done because they're almost overcorrecting, if that makes sense.
That makes so much sense. That's so difficult too, because you're talking about one of our most vulnerable populations being caught in kind of the crossfires of, governments and bureaucracy and maybe good motivated people and maybe other motivated people. But, there's so many layers of complexity in this situation.
Yeah. Well, and another part that really played a factor too that I did a research paper on was that there was a lot of child trafficking being used as international adoption.
Okay.
So some of these adoption agencies that were international, and not just in Korea, but in Africa or Europe or South America, they were posing as adoption agencies. But what these parents never realized is that it was people just snatching kids off the street and saying, we're giving you a new name. You are now known as this kid. You don't have parents anymore. And then selling them.
Wow.
So it was really, really messy because it all kind of happened around the same time, to where international agencies said, oh my goodness, we need to make sure these kids aren't being stolen.
Yeah.
Because these kids were growing up and doing, DNA tests and finding out that their mother was alive in Spain, and the mother going, I thought I saw your gravestone. I thought you were dead. So
wow.
Yeah, it gets very complex. But again, a lot of overcorrection happened because of accumulation of those things. And so it's interesting now to see how much harder adoption is for families because of the system messing up a while ago.
Well, and there's still a need for children to have a home. And so it's interesting. You have, again, kind of the, misuse of the system where children who have a home are getting, plucked up and trafficked or otherwise adopted. But then, there's still kids that actually do need, those resources and family support.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, to think on top of that, that not every single country where these kids come from really see women or respect women for being single mothers, right? So a big thing in Korea for a while, I don't know if it's still the case there, is that single mothers were really looked down upon and honestly really slut shamed. So I can say that my birth mother, she actually had me in college, and it was with the guy that she dated. They broke up.
Sure.
After they broke up, didn't realize she was pregnant, and then kind of got into the situation. But at least back then, the politics were very strange to where, for example, you could not drop off a baby at an orphanage or a foster care system, from my understanding, unless it was the mother that did it. If the father did it, they wouldn't take the kid. The mother had to be there.
Okay.
And that was because it almost, in a way, went on like your permanent record to show that you were an unwed mother, which is crazy.
So when you talk about permanent record, what do you mean by that?
It can mean if you're applying for housing, it'll show up on your record there. If you're applying for jobs,
so it's a stigma just kind of over you.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it very much sounds like it was something that if you did it, it would tell people about what kind of person you were, or your capability, or trustworthiness, or something like that. And that seems so hard.
Right, exactly. And it's a lot of times these women that, were unintentionally pregnant, or just life happens. Like sometimes it just happens and you have a kid when you're not married, but it added a big layer of permanency to it. This will always be a part of who you are and who you were,
Yeah, that's so interesting. So for children who maybe were given up but stayed in Korea, is there a stigma associated with, being from an unwed mother?
It's my understanding that, yes, that can be the case. I don't really know what it's like in today's day and age.
Sure.
I would hope that in like bigger cities like Seoul, it might be a little more progressive. But there definitely was a stigma around if you weren't born with a mother and a father who were married and carrying on the family generations and doing all of this other stuff, then yeah, there was a bit of a class difference.
Yeah, that's so hard because you can't control that.
Right, exactly. And, you're like, I was just born when I was born. I don't know what to tell you guys.
Yeah. Well, and the same thing for maybe the adoptees. It was like they didn't choose to be adopted. They didn't choose their life circumstances. Right. But then when the hardships roll in and the complications roll in, then they're the ones experiencing it.
Yeah.
I remember we talked before, you mentioned too that some parents didn't know to rescind the citizenship for their children that they were bringing into the U.S.
Yeah, so I learned this the hard way when I tried to study abroad in college in South Korea for a semester. And I was trying to stay for the spring and the summer because, endless Korean food, fun stuff.
I mean, yes.
Great times. And it was crazy because maybe 2-3 weeks before I was supposed to leave, I get a call and they tell me that my visa has been denied to go to Korea, which my mom and I said, why? Here's her American birth certificate. Here's her citizenship. Here is everything you need to know. And then I posted about it on Facebook and said, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I literally have an apartment booked. I have my plane ticket booked. What's going on? Yeah. And a lot of Korean people were actually very supportive, and they reached out and they said, hey, this is a really weird, unknown thing, but when you are adopted, you have to renounce dual citizenship as a Korean citizen and a U.S. citizen. And from my understanding, it's almost a 2-step process. So you can temporarily denounce your Korean citizenship, but then you have to fully do it again by a certain age.
Oh my goodness. How would you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of these Korean adoptees had no idea that they were dual citizens. But you're also, it's weird, Tiffany, you're not a full dual citizen either. I don't have a Korean passport. It's more like you're in a weird middle holding period. But it caused a lot more problem for male Korean adoptees rather than girls because adoptees could get drafted.
Military.
Yep.
Oh, I can't even imagine, coming to adulthood and living your life here. Maybe you were adopted as a baby and then you get a summons for military duty. Like,
right?
what do you do?
I know, and it's illegally. You have to go over there and figure it out. But it's almost a blessing in disguise that happened to me, because I grew up in a big Korean adoptee community, and so everyone was saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was a thing, and all the guys were freaking out. And so luckily, I think a lot of my friends were able to denounce their dual citizenship completely. But it's something
process.
that, the full process. But
Yeah.
it was something that you look at it and you're like, how does this group of like 10 different Korean adoptees and their parents, how did none of us have any idea to do this? It's so interesting.
Yes, there's just enough red tape to make it difficult for you to get where you need to go further with your life, wherever you choose to be.
Yeah.
And not enough protocol and communication for you to know what that requires.
Right, exactly.
Oh, that's so hard. So what were some of the key takeaways you would hope people would have from watching your documentary? And also, I would love to put a link in the show notes if it's publicly available.
Oh, 100% would love that. I can say that all the people who spoke anonymously in the documentary, they did eventually retain U.S. citizenship. So
good. Okay.
They are all in the
Happy ending.
in the clear.
Okay.
They are, again, all anonymous in the documentary, so their voices have been distorted a bit. There's fake actors over them, but it is really interesting. But I would hope that when people watch this documentary, I think, immigration is such a big topic right now. And I think it's easy because of how the media really portrays immigration with Mexico and the US, things of that nature, ICE everywhere. It's all really concerning, but there's also so many different types of immigrants, you know?
Right. They kind of make it a homogenous, group of everybody's all one way, especially if they all look a certain way.
Right, exactly. And so I think what I really hope people take away is that adoptees are immigrants, right? Yeah. And so there's so many people, and they'll be talking to me and they'll be like, oh, like, thank goodness ICE is getting rid of all these illegal immigrants. And I have to say, you do realize that I'm also an immigrant,
right, Right.
And I hope people have more of that well-rounded perspective of it's not always just a black and white, like, oh, either you're a U.S. citizen or you're not.
Right.
And
if you don't have papers, you did it on purpose for nefarious reasons.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
It's, maybe try to find some empathy. And a lot of these people are just trying to create a life for themselves or live with a family that chose them. It may not be a biological relationship, but it's a chosen love. It's a very special love. So I hope people just are able to really see people as a whole person and not just as
categorically
legal, not legal, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've noticed, like, that's really hard right now, especially in this country, is just this lower common humanity of, seeing ourselves as different and what we want and struggle with as different and unique than maybe people around us, because everybody has, you have your story, but everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And we all want to live at peace and live with ease and without suffering. And so I think I love that that's the work that your documentary can do in the world, is to maybe like raise collective empathy for others. So a little bit, and only what you feel comfortable sharing, of your own journey, what stands out to you in your journey of being a, international adoptee and a Korean American? If you're listening to How Would You Rate Your Pain, you're probably a person who understands the power of talking through the issues that we're going through. I'm really excited to let you know about BetterHelp, an online therapy platform. I'm not one of their therapists, but very thankful they sponsor this show. Wherever you are, BetterHelp will match you with a licensed therapist who can listen and help you through whatever you're going through. It's flexible and entirely online. Listeners of the show can get started with 10% off the first month by clicking the link in the show notes or by going to betterhelp.com/Tiffany Bartell.
I think, honestly, one, it has me so thankful for people that don't use adoption as like a last resort. You know, that very common language when they say, oh, well, we've been trying to have our own kids, but if we can't do it, then I guess we'll adopt, you know?
Yeah.
Because adoption is a really great thing. And there's so many great people that come out of that experience too. And I think there's such a stigma too that these kids come all messed up and have all these problems and everything. And it's as long as they have a good home, you know, great things happen.
Other child.
Yeah. But I would say too, with my own journey, one thing that I think made a really transformational difference is that I grew up in upstate New York with an entire community of parents, mostly white parents, who had Korean American adopted children who were all around the same age. So every month we would gather to learn about Korean culture, Korean heritage. We'd learn how to play the drums or make bulgogi or bibimbap, you know. And then once a summer we would go to a Korean culture camp that was a week long.
Wow.
And it was a mix of, one, really good Korean food.
I feel like everyone wants to go to Korean camp.
Yeah, it was so great. And then, but two, it was also learning about culture and saying, okay, you can understand this other part of your identity. Yeah. And then also they would sit us down when we were older and we'd get to sit in a circle and talk about adoptee trauma and adoptee stereotypes that you don't really see when you're just Korean or just white or things of that nature. It's very niche.
That's lovely.
But yeah. But having that support system growing up gave me so much confidence that when we moved from New York to areas that didn't have as many Korean American adoptees and just as many adoptee people, having that foundation was great. And knowing like it's not weird to like kimchi even though it smells kind of funky, you know, like plenty of people do.
Smell of kimchi.
I know, I'm like, oh, give me more.
I made seaweed soup yesterday for a friend that just had a baby. For those of you who don't know, it's very normal. When you have a baby, you eat, I think it's for a month. Is it seaweed soup for a month? I think I've heard.
Maybe.
I've never eaten it for a month straight because I'm only a quarter, so you know. But I had it. I was cooking it yesterday for my friend, and she's not Korean at all. So I was like, "You don't have to eat it, but here you go." But the smell, I was like, "This is such a smell of like home and like my great grandma's house and all the things." And so, I think that's one thing to think about too. You know, when we're thinking somebody else's food is smelly or, you know, because Indian curry is very pungent and Korean food's very pungent. And, you know, that might be the smell of their home. That might be what cozy and safe and loved feels like to them. Yeah. And so I think we have to be kind of careful, like, you know, as people outside of a group to use derogatory language towards something that might be quite lovely and beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a big difference between what is normal for you versus what is normal for the world, right? Because it's interesting when you grow up, you're in your bubble, and then the more you travel, the more you meet new people, the more you change your perspective, the bigger that bubble gets. And some people really roll with the punches and they love it and they say, tell me more about your culture, tell me more about this and that. And some people get fearful and that bubble gets tighter, you know? So I feel like when people make that active, conscientious choice to widen that bubble, it's always great to see. And you think of things of like, well, maybe people in Asia, maybe they come and they think barbecue smells terrible here. Like, you never know.
That's a really good point. So kind of segueing into that, you know, what is helpful and unhelpful when somebody is maybe curious about another culture or about your specific experience of being, you know, Korean adoptee. Because I feel like there's always questions that people have, but they don't know which ones feel good or feel kind and which ones feel, you know, a little microaggression-y.
Yeah, I would say it's probably a little different for every single person based on how they were adopted and what kind of relationship they've had with their family, or if they've tried to search for their birth family, things of that nature. But I think as long as you're able to maintain if I ask a question that crosses a line, just tell me and I'll stop. Right?
Yeah, so humility and openness.
Yeah, because there are some people that just dive right into the conversation and they'll ask questions that can be really invasive for adoptees of, oh, well, why were you given up? Or, you know, Okay. Or, are you going to search for your birth parents? Like, do you have a burning desire to find them? And it's, you know, they probably mean very well. But those are emotional questions that every Korean adoptee or any international adoptee has probably grappled with at some point in their life, you know? So it's kind of a thing of, oh, well, let me take these 10 years of contemplation and emotional roller coasters, and I'll just answer that for you.
Would you also like me to tell you my deepest fear and a recurrent nightmare?
Exactly.
I could tell you some insecurities if that's helpful.
But I think too, it was just little things. Like when I was in college, most of my friends were white, and it was just little things they would do where they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, can like you show us what good Korean food is and tell us where to go?" Or like,
that's very honoring.
Like little things like that. Or they would make sure that I got a chance to have Korean food every now and then because the cravings come in. I mean, it wasn't ever like it was like, oh my gosh, like and it was we're doing this for you. So I think little ways when you can not only be open to learning about the culture but embracing it with that person, it kind of gives you that sense of hominess.
And it's less of like intrusive, like really sensationalist curiosity and more of like, I'd really like to know you.
Yes, exactly. And I think one important thing to remember too is that a lot of adoptees can have an identity crisis at one point or another. A narrative that I've heard in the Korean adoptee community is, well, I'm not Korean, but I'm also not American. Like you're kind of in that weird circle where you are a bit of both. But you don't really fully fit into either community. You make your own community. So, for example, people might be like, oh, like this guy's Korean, you should go date him. But to date someone with Korean parents, is very different than to date someone who is Asian but has white parents, because that's two very different childhoods for when you grow up, I've
heard that a lot from my Asian clients of like not being enough of this, but not being enough of that, and that straddling that middle ground. Sounds like it can be really hard, and especially like it's really different if your parents came from Korea to here but were born and raised there versus like your parents are Korean American but like third generation American,
right?
And so maybe there's not even any Korean spoken in the home,
right? Exactly. And there's a lot of pride behind being Korean, right? Good pride for sure. But big things I can think of is when I was in college and just trying to date, like I remember going on a date with someone who was fully Korean, had Korean parents, all that jazz. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, great. Someone that like knows Korean food and knows all this stuff. And I think I just was talking about food and I was like, oh yeah, I love some good bulgogi. And he looked at me and was like, you are not Korean if you cannot say bulgogi properly. And it didn't have like a Korean accent on it or something like that. But it was such a weird thing where I was like, what do you mean I'm not fully Korean? And I took it really personally. I was like, wow, screw you. Okay. And then I talked to my friends who were adoptees and they were like, yeah, it's like, it's hard to date because there's a difference, of people that grow up and are so normalized by it. And then they see you and they don't hear it. You don't know any Korean. You didn't grow up in the culture. Like you don't go over every few years to visit your grandparents there. Like it's very different.
Yeah. So I think that's one thing that I really love when we're studying like, multicultural concepts is there's a lot to know in themes, but there's so many within group differences too. And maybe that moves us away from assumptions and away from stereotyping. And maybe we're slightly less likely to, have microaggressions if we realize that just like our experience, of being whatever we are is different from somebody who may look like us. There's just a vast, diverse amount of people doing different things and having different lived experiences.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like a good thing for people to keep in mind if they want to learn more about the adoptee community or the Korean community or whatever it may be is that even when it sounds like a compliment, whenever you are grouping people together and making assumptions, it could hit a chord either way. In school, there was a lot of, oh, like, you must be so good at math because you're Asian. And it's like, it's a joke where you're like, it's not doing any harm necessarily, but it's something that if you are Korean or you are a Korean adoptee, you go, oh, did you get that joke? Yeah, I got that joke too. And it's just little things like that to where someone who may be a Korean adoptee who's not good at math might be like, oh my gosh, okay, so like,
not enough.
Am I not?
I'm not enough.
Adds to that narrative.
Yeah. Do you have any particular pet peeves or questions that you don't enjoy?
Ooh. Let me pull up my list. No, I'm kidding. I think the biggest one would be about the search for birth parents, partially because I'm very set on if I am going to search for my birth parents and I do find them or I don't find them, I'm not going to put it on social media.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to be like,
private.
oh my gosh, great news. Right. It's a very private thing. And I think when people assume that you want to talk about it, it might be like, hey, this person might have found their birth mother and she might have said, no, I don't want to meet you. You have no idea where that person is in their life or how their birth parents might have responded if they did find them. Because again, going back to how women are a little slut shamed and everything, I don't want to say a lot, but some birth mothers in Korea get very fearful of like, oh, if my unwed child shows up again, people in the town are going to talk, depending on where you were born. So it can, it could cause issues. I don't want to say that it would, but that's always something to keep in mind too, and that the reactions aren't always what you would hope it would be. That's a big one. I would say too, another big one is just when people talk about how, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I would say when people just say like, oh, like, you're a Asian, a white Asian, or just those like names that like they don't come off bad, but it can be a little weird sometimes. Where you're
it's
like
that categorizing too. Yeah,
exactly.
Like I know something about you, which I mean that's like stereotyping, right? If you think you know something about somebody by just looking at them,
maybe not.
yeah.
And I think one too is that when people ask, like, why were you adopted? Because some kids may not know that answer too. And for some, it might be because parents have gone through some sort of grief or something happened or they weren't able to have kids. And it's not always the adoptee's place to share their parents' story.
That's a good point. So maybe we're just kind of landing on like maybe we don't ask intrusive questions.
And
be considerate. Because I mean, I don't think we wouldn't ask that necessarily about American parents of like, did your parents want you when they had you, or like what were the circumstances of your birth? We wouldn't say that.
Yeah, C-section or what? Yeah.
Did you have an epidural or not?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Was it natural labor or not natural labor?
Well, and I think too that if you just go into the conversation and say like, just want to get a vibe check, like, are there things that would make you uncomfy? Because I do want to know more about your adoption process or whatever it may be, but I don't want to cross any boundaries. Even just that acknowledgement can go a really long way.
I like that.
And you're not really going to meet someone, in my opinion, who's going to be like, oh, like, you could ask me whatever you want and secretly be like, no, please don't ask me about this thing. They'll be honest with you.
I love that broaching, because that really honors any boundaries they know. Because I think too, I think with the privilege that you have from being in a dominant group, there is like that kind of subtle like power differential. And so you might get somebody to answer your question that they don't want to answer, that they feel really uncomfortable with, because intrinsically it doesn't feel safe to put a boundary down. Right. Because there are people in the world that will react really poorly and aggressively to boundaries and be like, oh, I was just asking a question, Yeah. And so I love the idea of broaching and letting it know, like, listen, like, shut it down anytime, or what do you want me to know? What would be helpful as we're building this relationship or this friendship? Yeah. Because it's very normal for us to learn about each other's families and learning about each other's like histories when we're making friendships and relationships, that we should always be respectful.
Right, exactly. Right. And you just have, and I think the thing that people may forget about the adoption process is there was probably some form of grief along the way in that adoptee's journey, right? Yeah. Whether it was, because, when you're 13 and you're going through puberty and you get the weirdest thoughts in your head and your hormones are through the roof.
And identity is so big.
Right. And like you have an identity crisis, and when you're adopted, it's like times 10. You're like, oh my gosh, like, why do I not like kimchi? No, but I think it's important to remember that an adoptee at one point in their life will go through the mindset of, why did my birth parents not want to keep me? Do I want to go find them? And if something bad in their life happens with their adopted family, say like a parent dies, or maybe they're homeless a little bit or something like that, sometimes that thought might be, well, why did I get adopted into this family and still have to go through all this stuff,
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
there can definitely be more layers of that emotional roller coaster for sure.
That makes sense.
And you just never know when you're talking to someone about their personal journey as an adoptee, like where you might accidentally tap those triggers, because they've been on that emotional roller coaster, I guarantee you, at least at one point in their life, if not more.
That's really helpful to know, that we should be so careful and compassionate, which we should be with all people.
Yeah.
But maybe there's more ways that we could accidentally hurt someone, the more layers of intersectionality they have. And so I think that's really helpful. Anything else that you would love listeners to know or think about on this subject?
Ooh, I would say one more pet peeve that I don't necessarily have.
All the pet
but
peeves.
all the pet
time,
peeves.
Yes.
But that my mom actually had is that when we were growing up, people assumed she was a grandmother because there was such an age gap between when she adopted us, because she was at an age where she couldn't biologically have kids anymore, so people assumed she was a grandmother or things of that nature. And it really offended her. She did not like that. And people would go, oh, and they would assume also that we weren't her kids sometimes too.
Okay.
So I would say too, when
Then
you're
you
in
stop
public,
assuming.
just maybe don't jump to conclusions and just don't assume someone's a grandmother.
Yeah.
But
Women don't like that. When you
play it safe first.
Yeah. That's really helpful. So yes, the themes are like compassionate, kind, respectful curiosity.
Yeah, exactly.
And broaching, but maybe we should all be like good citizens, with each other and steer away from assuming.
Yeah, and I would say you're going to make mistakes, you're going to slip up, you're going to say stuff. I've done it in my own life. But I think it's important to just not get defensive, take accountability, and just say, okay, I've learned and I won't do it again. Because if any human could say, I am perfect, I've never said anything offensive, it's so easy, I think, especially.
That just means you have lots of blind spots and you're hurting people maybe regularly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like especially in today's age, there's such a narrative behind like either you're on the good side or the bad side. Right. And if you say one thing, then you must be from the bad side. And if you say one good thing, you're over there. You know what I mean? And for everyone, it's a learning process.
Continuous.
Everything. And you're born and you grow up with so many, I guess, unintentional biases because of the environment you grow up in.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to not just give yourself a hard time or walk on eggshells so much that you don't really learn, but just to be respectful about it and say, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to learn new things.
Yeah, I like that.
But I'm in a safe space to do so.
Yeah, so do the work, educate yourself, but be humble enough that we don't have to shame spiral. When we make a mistake, we know how to repair.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, Angela. I feel like we could talk for 3 more hours about all things multicultural. And thank you to each of you for joining us today. Be gentle with yourselves, and we'll see you next time. How Would You Rate Your Pain is a pop media production and is recorded at Wavelength Studios in downtown Chattanooga, Tennessee. Our set is designed by Mad Honey Rentals, graphic design provided by Josh Wilhelms at JW Creates. Music is by Michael Crosa. This podcast is not intended to be taken as medical advice and should not take the place of regular therapy. If you have questions about your mental health, see a licensed clinical therapist. I'm Dr. Tiffany Bartell. Please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at How Would You Rate Your Pain. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week for another episode.